The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy.
I wish I knew the guy who first told this story, because I'd love to credit him, but I couldn't find it. He told the story of how he's walking along the beach with his young daughter, 10 or 11 years old, and as they're walking along, they come and they find a girl's bathing suit and a boy's bathing suit just right there, right by the water. And the little girl says, "Daddy, what happened?" He thought, "Oh my God, this is it. This is the teachable moment." He says, "Well, honey, sometimes when a girl and a boy get together, but actually it could be a boy and a boy and a girl, and they feel something really special, and this energy inside, and when they take their clothes off." And she looks up at him, and they look at the empty clothes, and he turns to her and says, "Well, God melts them." Lying is so instinctual. It's like we can't not do it. And telling the truth as a spiritual practice is quite a transformative journey. And in fact, it's been said that without a commitment to truth, there's no path. Because truth is really about seeing what's true. And what I'd like to talk about with the little bit of time we have tonight is to talk a little bit about some of the essential teachings on truth and truth-telling. And then to explore a little bit about how when you focus on telling the truth, you begin to notice all the lies. And how we lie to ourselves, how we lie to each other, and about how really embracing telling truth can be quite a powerful practice. So I was thinking about this, and this was one of my back in the old days stories that I always dreaded when older people would talk about this. But back when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm, and we only got 2.5 channels, and a black and white TV, and so my TV watching was pretty limited to kind of like the stock, sitcoms and stuff like that. And even at a pretty young age, I began to notice a basic rhetorical structure to every situation comedy that I watched. I Dream of Jeannie and all those things. Every show was based on a lie. And at the end of the show, the lie would get exposed. And I remember thinking to myself, if they just told the truth, we wouldn't have to go through all this stuff. And I imagine you consider yourself an honest person. I think most people do, and I did, until I really started paying attention, and I'll just touch on that in a little bit. But different systems have different codes of ethics. Any philosophy, any religion has at its base certain observations and certain restraints. A moral code that creates a riverbank for that particular tradition. In the Buddhist system, you undertake what are called the precepts. And we will be starting our retreat with 100+ people on Friday, and we begin the retreat by undertaking these precepts. There are 5 of them, and these are the 5 trainings that you choose to undertake. The first one is to undertake the rule to abstain from killing. The second is to undertake the rule to abstain from taking what is not freely given. The third is to undertake the training to abstain from sexual misconduct. And the fourth is to undertake the rule to abstain from false speech. And the fifth, I undertake the rule to abstain from intoxicants that could cloud the mind. These are the 5 foundational precepts that we take. So we reviewed these before for a retreat when you're really dedicating yourself to intensive practice. And one of the nice things about being on a retreat is when you undertake the rule to abstain from false speech, it's really easy because you're in silence for the entire week. The rest, they can be challenging. So when you undertake these trainings, you're really undertaking kind of restraints to habitual ways of being in the world. So you're restraining and you're paying attention to what happens when you restrain. And just like in the sitcoms, the truth will set you free. By the end of the sitcom, the lie is revealed and everyone's back together and the lesson is learned. And in that same way, the truth really can set you free when you undertake it as a focus in your life. When I think about AA and all the different variations of AA, this tradition has probably saved more lives than any other tradition. And it's all based on being truthful. It's owning up to your actions. It's owning up to the ramifications of your past actions. It's being truthful when you slip from your focus. It's being truthful to those who are supporting you, to your sponsor. And then as you progress, then it's about sponsoring other people and knowing that the hard truth is going to set them free. So it's such a beautiful system because it's all based on truth and accountability. And when we can embrace that for ourselves, it can be a really dynamic force. And yet we have this inherent kind of built-in capacity for lying and deception. And it's actually in nature. When you look at how deception plays out in nature, it's really quite interesting. A lot of animals can be real jerks. Here are a couple examples. I didn't know this, but blue jays are really good at imitating a variety of hawks. They can imitate their sounds, which is great to scatter other birds from the bird feeder. Amazing. Cowbirds produce up to 40 eggs a year, and their specialty is sneaking their eggs into other nests so other birds will raise them. And I didn't know this either. It's on the internet, so it's true. Gray squirrels will hold a nut in their teeth and pretend to bury it in different places to keep the other squirrels from stealing it. So this is kind of baked into our nature, that we use deception in order to survive and thrive in the world. And so, as we say, when you begin to practice meditation with the intention to be more awake, you're swimming upstream. You're swimming against all of your own conditioning and the conditioning of the culture. In that same way, when you take on a commitment to truthfulness, you're swimming against this inherent desire to kind of self-protect and get ahead. And it's a transformational practice. So, as I've mentioned many times, I lived in a spiritual community for 24 years, and the philosophy that we were sort of living under was kind of the philosophy of yoga, of kind of Samkhya yoga and Raja yoga. And in that particular system, in Buddhism, there's the practice of sila with the five precepts. But in yoga philosophy, you have what are called the yamas and niyamas. And there are 5 observances and 5 restraints. And when you look at them, you even look at them just in a very cursory way, they're quite parallel to the 10 Commandments, to the ethical teachings in Christianity. They're sort of like the outer world observances, such as nonviolence and truthfulness and non-stealing, non-excess, and non-greed. And then there are kind of the inner disciplines of cultivating purity and contentment with what you have, self-discipline, self-study, and surrendering to a higher power. So at some point in my practice, I remember we were encouraged to select one of these yamas and niyamas and have that as your primary focus. As they say, it's like having mala beads, and when you have different, like the beads on a string, if you just pick up one bead, the entire string comes with it. So you can just select one thing and everything else gets activated. But I chose satya, and satya means truth, and truth-telling. And I thought, well, this will be really good for me, because I am chronically conflict-averse. I understand my patterns of avoidance, but it doesn't make it any easier. So I thought, well, this will be empowering. I'm going to train myself to tell the truth. I'm going to reaffirm every morning I'm going to tell the truth, and I'm going to write down all the breakthroughs I have. And so I thought, this is it. Day 1, I'm going to tell the truth. And I noticed immediately how I lie all the time. And have you ever noticed the white lies that you tell? Just the little white lies you tell during a day. It's amazing when you really start paying attention how many little untruths creep into the day. Joseph Goldstein tells the story of that he took on a practice, and this was kind of from the Buddhist training, that one of the practices in wise speech is you never talk about someone unless they're present. And he noticed, like at the end of the first day, it had just wiped out 80% of his conversations. So seeing how you might tend to lie to yourself. Someone doesn't do something, and you say, well, no, I'm not disappointed. Well, yes, you are, Or thinking, I'm the smartest person in the room. Or I'm the least talented person in the room. Or I'm poor, I'm rich. Whatever it may be, the stories we tell ourselves, quite often, they're not reality-based. And so it's one thing to begin to notice sort of the self-deception, how the stories that you're telling yourself may not be actually based in reality. But where it gets really interesting and much more complicated is in relationship with other people. Sam Harris tells a story about a friend who asked him a question. If you're not familiar with Sam Harris, he's quite a very rigorous guy. There were 2 couples kind of hanging out by the pool, and he was just sitting with a friend of his. And his friend said, hey, do you think I'm fat? Like the classic, And there are all the jokes, which I won't even go into those. I'll spare you. And so what he wrote was, he said, in fact, he was probably just asking for reassurance. It was the beginning of summer, and we were sitting with our wives by the side of his pool. However, I'm more comfortable relying on the words that actually come out of a person's mouth rather than on my powers of telepathy. So I answered my friend's question very directly. No one would ever call you fat, but if I were you, I'd want to lose 25 pounds. That was 2 months ago, and he is now 15 pounds lighter. Neither of us knew that he was ready to go on a diet until I declined the opportunity to lie about how he looked in a bathing suit. That takes some rigor to actually tell the truth. In a little bit, I'd like to share some of the conditions that can help you to be more sensitive around speaking truth and really what that means. If you've ever been in some kind of conflict with someone, maybe you've had that thought of like you're really aware of the conversation you're not having when you're kind of talking around something. There's this great line I love that says, what you can't communicate controls you. If there's something you can't say, you're held, you're bound by that. And conversely, what you can communicate can set you free. But getting to that place of clear communication is the challenge. So again, when you begin to notice whether you are telling the truth or not in relationships, that again can be quite revealing. The times you say, no, I'm actually busy that night, when you're not. Or when you say, no, that dress looks great on you, when it doesn't. Or when you say, oh, sure, I've got 5 minutes, and you don't. Or you say, sure, I'd be happy to take on that project, when you aren't. So it's really interesting. Why do people lie? So here are 9 reasons. I'm sure there are more, but here are 9. To avoid being punished, and you certainly see this with kids, They've got chocolate on their face, Were you eating chocolate? No. To obtain a reward not easily obtainable. So you'll mask the truth in order to get what you want. To protect yourself from harm. To win admiration from others, just exaggeration or self-aggrandizement. To get out of an awkward situation. To avoid embarrassment. To maintain privacy. Or to control information. So I sat down, I thought about each of those 9, and I could come up with lots of examples in my life of how all of those had shown up for me. And other ways that we fail to tell the truth. They're just kind of a long list, but just to kind of go through them. When you flatter someone, when you exaggerate, when you blame, complain, justify yourself, when you cheat, make excuses, when you're being pretentious, when you're not keeping someone's confidence and you said you would, lacking transparency, being insincere, plagiarism. It can be quite stunning to really begin to investigate the failure to be true. But then this brings up a really interesting question just from the place of morality. Does it mean that you have to be brutally honest with everyone you meet? And that depends. And there's a very interesting element now that's sort of like come into the therapeutic field. And it's sort of when you have been unfaithful to a partner, kind of a question, should you always confess? And now there are those in the therapeutic realms that say, maybe not. But sometimes that can actually be more dangerous for a relationship to actually tell the truth about an affair. But that doesn't mean that you don't do your homework. That really what you need to do is to find someone who can work with you and to do what you need to do to look at your motivations and to be honest about your actions. But confessing might do irreparable harm to that relationship if you really want to maintain it. Is it immoral to lie if you have Anne Frank in your basement? There's a story of the Buddha, and again, there's such mythology around the Buddha and his life. There are so many fantastical stories, but there's one story that I ran across because there are those that say the Buddha never lied, in his life, that he was impeccable. But again, that there's a relativity to telling the truth. So the story goes, and again, who knows if this is true, that the Buddha was doing walking meditation, and he just had a premonition that something was going to happen, and a man came running by, and he was continuing his walking meditation. And then a little while, robbers came chasing him, and then the main guy, the head of the gang, stopped the Buddha and he said, "Did you see a man running by when you were standing there?" And the Buddha said, "No." And what he didn't say is that he was standing over there when the man was running by. So whether there's a relativity to being truthful all the time or not, there's a lot of juice in exploring your relationship to being truthful. And of course, we get to see so many opportunities to see when we're being truthful or not. The classic example is if you're talking to someone and they have like a piece of food on their lip, or greens in their teeth. Do you tell them or do you not? It's always interesting to kind of observe other people. Some people have no problem and other people just don't. So it's such a mirror as to how we tell the truth or not. So then the question becomes how. Particularly when there's something difficult to say, how do you do it? There was a time in my life when I was at Kripalu Center where I lived, where I was elevated to being president of the organization. And at that time, we were going through a pretty rough financial situation. And in a board meeting, I was told that I had to basically cut down our expenses pretty dramatically. And the only way to do that was to fire a whole bunch of people. I had never formally fired anyone in my life. And many of these people were people I had lived with for many, many years, and many of them were senior to me. I was just sick at the idea of having to go through these meetings with people who I kind of grew up with and to cut them loose. Fortunately, one of my best friends in the world had been in the business world his whole life and had fired a lot of people. And he told me about the first time he had to fire someone who was one of his best friends. And he said it was just the worst experience, where they were both crying and holding each other as he was trying to fire his best friend. And he told me about what it's like, his career of firing people, and how everyone has a different reaction to the truth. That some people get very, very angry, and they go into a rage and they say things that they regret later. Some people get very sullen. Some people become caretakers. Oh, this must be so hard for you. What's it like for you? And so he basically told me that the way to fire someone is to create a meeting, set up a meeting, and tell them it's not working out, that there's going to be a package for you to look at, And next week, you want to set up a time to meet with them and then leave. And allow them to have their first reaction. And then when you meet, they've gone through their first and second and third reaction, and then you can have a conversation. And he said, where it really came from, part of this is to really ask yourself, how would you like to be treated if you knew that you were being cut loose? Because so many people, in their first reaction, there's so much shame and embarrassment and anger. So it's really actually very respectful to give them that space. So the key, as always, when it comes to telling the truth, is to really bring into play this very, very simple but very beautiful instruction. And that is to see yourself in the other and see the other in yourself, which is really your capacity to role reverse. That when you can imagine another's point of view, when you can imagine what another person is feeling, when you can imagine another person's unmet need, what they're wanting, what they're hoping for, when you can do that, that informs you in a very powerful way to be able to say what is true or what is most appropriate. Rick Hansen talks a little bit. He's the author of Buddha's Brain and talks a lot around the neurobiology of meditation, and that when you are wanting to be truthful, it's very helpful to put yourself into the best state possible. And what he recommends is to connect with your body, to breathe. Because when you breathe, it automatically connects you with the here and now. And he says it's really helpful to take some time to think about the people who care for you. Oh, and I skipped one important thing, that when you have to fire someone, actually it was one of the most helpful things ever for me, was think about how great it'll be when it's over. And it's actually very, very helpful, because then you're streaming attention to getting through that hurdle. So to think of the people who care for you, that it'll soften you, it'll open the heart a little bit. And to reflect on what is the most important message that you have to say. And to think about the other person's, their unmet needs. Think about what they're feeling. And to wish them goodwill. And to give them permission for their first reaction. And as someone who's chronically conflict averse, that little piece is really helpful for me. Everyone is entitled to their first reaction. So when you have something difficult to say, to know that at first blush, it may not be easy. There may be something really strong in their reactivity, but the intention through your goodwill to stay present to that will help you to move through that difficulty. So when it comes to wise speech, and just another little helpful thing, and then we'll try a little meditation in a few minutes. I found it very, very helpful, again, with these instructions around what does it mean to speak with wisdom and with compassion when there's something difficult to say. The preface, again, is to be self-aware and to be aware of other. So when you have something difficult to say, it's important to really ask yourself, what am I feeling? What am I needing? Because if there's a charge, if you're holding a charge, chances are it will not come out skillfully. But before you start a conversation with someone, it's helpful to ask these questions. Is what I'm about to say helpful? Is what I'm about to say true? Is what I'm about to say kind? Is what I'm about to say timely? And is what I'm about to say something the other person can hear? Going through that checklist is so helpful. Is what you're about to say helpful? Or do you have a charge? Are you wanting to, is there some agenda you have? Is it true? And you have to role reverse. Is the other person really, is what they agree I'm going to say actually true? Is it kind? Is now the right time? And the last one is maybe the most important. Can this other person hear what I have to say? Is this something that they can really hear? And sometimes you might have to modify what you say or look for other skillful means to help deliver that message. So let's do a little reflection. We have a few minutes before we close. And we'll begin with a little reflection on self. When you take a few moments first to feel your breath, and when you feel the presence of this moment, it's sometimes helpful to reflect on your relationship with truth and speaking the truth. How was it modeled for you when you were young? Did those who sort of shaped your perspective, were they truth speakers, or were there truths that weren't touched on when you were a child or in your family? And you might just sense in your life, how truthful are you toward yourself? And can you imagine embracing a commitment to seeing more clearly into what is true? You might bring into mind now just someone that you may feel a little bit of separation from. And someone with whom you feel maybe some conflict or just a little bit of distance. And you just might inquire, what's between you and being truthful with this person? What's between you and being truthful? Can you sense that barrier, that resistance? And you might inquire, what would you want to say to this person? What would you want them to know? If you could imagine a role reversal with this person, if you could step into their shoes, what do you imagine their point of view is? And what do you imagine they're feeling? What do you imagine they're needing or wanting that didn't happen? And you might imagine if there was an opportunity to speak with them. And you might just sort of review this checklist. Is what you would want to say to them helpful? Is what you would want to say to them true? Is it kind? Is it timely? When might there be a best time to have an honest conversation? And is what you would like to say to this person something they could hear? Or is there a sense of what they would need in order to hear you? If you like, you can deepen your breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes. Opening to this sense of truth and truthfulness can be pretty scary. Can be quite vulnerable. I remember one exercise at a training I once did where the teacher said, who you are is how you show up in someone's life. You might tell yourself you're a kind person, but if other people don't experience you that way, that's not how you show up. And there's a great article I read a number of years ago about an executive coach who was meeting with the vice president of a company and said, the good news is the company wants to invest in you, and I'm going to help you to focus on what you do well and how you can do better. He said, so tell me about your wife and your kids. And the guy said, I've got a great relationship with my wife. She's been really supportive, and she's totally behind me in everything I do. We tell each other everything, and my kids they're great kids. They're in college now, and we get together, we talk about everything. It's great. And the guy said, what's your wife's phone number? And he called her. And he said, so what's it like? What's it like? What's your husband like? And he said, he's a narcissist. He's a jerk. He won't listen to me. He's always telling me what I need to do. And he called the kids, and they had all these complaints. And here's the story he had about how he showed up. And what this training said is one of the most powerful things you can do. It is very, very rare. But if you really want to explore something interesting, is if there's someone who's willing to tell you the truth, to ask them, how do I show up in your world? And if you can find someone who is willing to tell you, honestly, it's incredibly powerful feedback. And again, our inclination is always to use deception to preserve ourselves. I saw this online. Someone sent their partner a text message saying, hi, honey, what are you up to? The response was, nothing much, really tired. I'm just now going to sleep. And you? I'm in the club standing behind you. Another one I saw was of someone who on Instagram said, I've been working out, I'm feeling really healthy. And it was pointed out that the six-pack abs that he had pasted on his own belly didn't have a belly button. It's amazing how lies just don't last long. And Mark Twain said how one of the advantages is if you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. So really embracing truth-telling can be a very, very powerful path, because it's not only the truth of our relationships, but the truth of who you really are and what you really want from this life. There's some wonderful models out there for truthful communication, and I'll share some of those models, but I thank you for your time. Why don't we have just a short little reflection before we close? Just a short little phrase. Again, this is from the kind of the original lines. Just the sense of a mind that is dedicated to seeing clearly, and a heart that is dedicated to holding that truth. This beautiful, short description of this state from the Dhammapada. An untroubled mind, no longer seeking to consider what is right and what is wrong. A mind beyond judgments, watches and understands. In these final moments, just sensing how in your practice and in your life, as you intend to resonate more and more intimately with what is true, and this capacity for an untroubled mind, a mind beyond judgments, can deepen and widen. And when you're ready now, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for coming out. Thanks for your time and attention. The truth is there are cookies out there. I saw the cart go by. Enjoy your week. I'll see you in 2 weeks, and enjoy Shell next week if you can make it. Thank you.